Welcome to the 5th episode of CTCA UK's Voice of the Diaspora, Explore Your Past with Mustafa Kureyşi. Today we have a special episode, a unique episode. As is known, the Ottoman rule in Cyprus began in 1570-71. However, what is often omitted in the common historic discourse is regarding the Turks in pre-Ottoman Cyprus. Actually, it should come to no surprise considering that the lands surrounding the pre-Ottoman Cyprus were settled by and ruled by Turkish peoples. I actually presented a similar topic regarding the pre-Ottoman Muslim presence, which can be found on the Cezire Derine YouTube channel. But today we're going to focus on solely the Turkish presence in Cyprus. And as such, I have a very special guest sharing his knowledge on this topic, a researcher, a Turkish Cypriot Turkologist. We have Dr. Gökçe Yükselen Abdurrazak Peler with us today.
Thank you.
Welcome,
Thanks
Dr.
for having me in your program.
It's an honor. It's an honor, and it's a really unique program that we have today. So I'm really excited to have you on. Firstly, I would like to thank you for accepting my invitation to come on.
Thank you. It's an honor for me.
Could we please start with, if you may, introduce yourself to the audience?
Of course. As you have mentioned, my name is Gökçe Yükselen Abdurrazak Peler. I was born in 1975 in Southeast London, Lewisham, as the first child of a Turkish Cypriot family. Mm-hmm. I grew up in Cyprus. I had my primary and secondary education in Cyprus. Mm-hmm. My degree in Istanbul University in Turkey, and my master and PhD in SOAS University of London. Mm-hmm. Currently, I'm working as a faculty member in Erciyes University in Kayseri, at the Department of Contemporary Turkic Languages and Literatures.
Wow. And so today we'll be talking about the pre-Ottoman presence of the Turks on the island. Could you enlighten us about these Turks, which communities or groups of Turks were present?
Sure, of course. The general information about the first Turkish presence on the island is that they came after the Ottoman conquest of the island. However, when we look into the sources, we find out that there was a big Turkish community on the island prior to the Ottoman conquest, and we had several groups of them. We could group them into two big groups as civilians and soldiers. Mm-hmm. Among the civilians, we had the ordinary people, which were on the island since the Arabic Islamic rule in the island. We have the trade colony, which was there throughout the Lusinian period, and we have the Turkish prisoners and the slaves. And as soldiers, we see that there was the Qaramanid troops, Turcopoles, Tatars, Mamluks, and Turkomans. Mm-hmm. So, as you can see, there were sorts of communities on the island.
Okay, so they didn't just belong to the old Anatolian tribes. Then.
All sorts. Yeah, I mean, the Tatars, they're from the north of Black Sea. Mm-hmm. From the Golden Horde area, we got the Ctcauk, the Mamluks from the Mamluks from Egypt, and then we got the Turkomans, the Oghuz group. So all sorts of tribes and all sorts of social layers.
That's really interesting that they belong to such a vast array of social strata and different tribes of Turks as well. So I'm going to try and dissect each of those communities. So first of all, I want to know the southern Anatolian Qaramanids. What was their aim in Cyprus?
That's an interesting issue. Surprisingly, being a Muslim Oghuz group, mm-hmm. They were allies of the Christian kingdom of Cyprus, a Crusader kingdom. They fought against the Muslims, the Mamluks. Later the other principalities, and their presence on the island is mentioned both by Muslim and Christian sources. So there's no doubt they were there. We know names. For instance, the son of the Tekebe, the Beg of Antalya, Ibrahim, he was killed in a war against the Mamluks. We know that they were these Qaramanid troops. They were slaughtered in 1426 at the Battle of Herokhotia. So until the Battle of Herokhotia, they were always on the island, and they were always fighting against the Muslims and Turks.
And do we know why they were fighting against their Turkish brethren? I mean, they were both Muslim, they were both ethnically Turkish as well.
We can guess that that's because of the geopolitical reasons, because they were claiming the Anatolian throne after the Seljukids, and they were claiming that they should be ruling Anatolia and possibly the surroundings, and therefore they were fighting for the Turkish rule for Anatolia and the surroundings, and as a result of this, they had to fight against other Turks and Muslims. So the enemy of my enemy is my friend. That's the reason.
Yeah, and actually, this isn't unique to Cyprus either. I mean, Turkish history is full of Muslim Turks fighting other Muslim Turks.
Exactly.
We
got Timur and Bayazid. We got Ottomans against Mamluks. We got Ottomans against Safavids. All Turks against Turks.
Yeah. And you mentioned about the Turcopoles as well. That's an interesting name there. So what activities were they involved in? And firstly, who are the Turcopoles?
First of all, let's look what the word Turcopole means. The word comes from the Greek, Byzantine Greek word Turkopoloi, meaning Turks used by the Byzantine army. So the Turks used by the Byzantine army were called Turcopoles. And they were thought to be offsprings of Turkish Christian marriages, Turks converted to Christianity, and the children of the Turks who converted to Christianity. Literally, the word means son of Turks. So troops composed of son of Turks were called Turcopoloi. We see that this practice of using Turcopoles in the army was maintained by the Crusaders as well. However, there's some alterations in the application. The Turcopoles in the crusading armies were usually light cavalry from the Middle East origin, soldiers with Middle East origins. They were called Turcopoles. And we know that there were Muslims among them as well, not only Christian and Middle Eastern Christians, Muslim soldiers as well. And always they were commanded by a Latin. I mean, the troops were Middle Eastern, and some of them, maybe most of them, Muslims and Turks, but the commander was always a Latin. And what were their duties? Their duties in the crusading armies? Of course, apart from combat, they were used as scouts for watching Muslims. I mean, very convenient because they look the same. Nobody can locate them. They were used as for correspondence with the outposts, and used as servants for the order magnates. So they had several functions in the crusading armies. And they were always regarded as murtads, as traitors by the Muslims. For instance, apostates. For instance, the Turcopoles captured after the Battle of Hattin by Saladin, they were all executed because they were treated as traitors, apostates. And the same was with the Mamluks. They were treated as apostates. And in Cyprus, the first date that we can locate Turcopoles on the island is 1191. In 1191, Isaac Comnen offered 500 cavalries to Richard the Lionheart, and we know that 400 of these were Turcopoles. So since the end of the 12th century, Turcopoles, we know that they are on the island. After the fall of Accra in 1291, the Hospitalier and the Templar Knights transferred their headquarters to Cyprus. And accordingly, as a result of this act, there were three groups of Turcopoles on the island: the Hospitalier Turcopoles, the Templar Turcopoles, and the Royal Turcopoles, meaning belonging to the Lusignan dynasty. The Order Turcopoles, meaning the Hospitalier and the Templar Turcopoles, were ruled by a Latin which was called the Turcopolier. The Royal Turcopoles, meaning the Turcopoles belonging to the Lusignan dynasty, were always ruled by an office called the Grand Turcopolier. We see that from 1192, the Lusignan kings started distributing fiefs, land, to Turcopoles, and they were responsible for the security of the rural areas of the island. And they were all also they were the only group apart from the Crusaders who were entitled to carry weapons. Of course, this gave them a big power in the society, and they were the only power in the rural areas. Therefore, they had a big impact on the Cypriot rural society, which we can observe even during the British period. We know that they were on the island during the Venetian period as well, because there's a record that the Ottoman attack in 1500 on Cyprus were repulsed by Turcopoles. And another, in two sources, there are two different records about this incident. One record says they were Turcopoles, and the other record says they were Turcomans. So this record, these two records tell us who the Turcopoles were. They were Turcomans.
I was going to say, actually, because you could get somebody who could say, well, the Turcopoles were of mixed compositions. It included non-Turks and non-Muslims as well. But in this case, you're saying there's a source which refers to the Turcopoles as Turcomans.
Exactly. Two different sources gives us this information, and leaves no doubt.
Where can we find these references?
You mean the two different? One is in Macharias, the other one is in Bustronios.
Okay.
So if you look in the two chronicles, you will see them.
Yeah.
I said that their impact, we can see their impact even during the British rule, the era. For instance, rural constable, which the official name of the post, which was a rural constable, unofficially was called the Turcopolier. It's easy to guess how this where this connection comes from. The Turcopoles were responsible for the security of the rural areas, and the rural constable is still called the Turcopolier during the British rule. So, of course, this is a result of the impact the Turcopoles had on the rural society of Cyprus. They maintained the word for the post, which was responsible for the security of the rural areas. So the British post carries unofficially the name of the Lusignan post. And another important information is that in the Cypriot dialect of Greek, there's a word Turcopoles. This is recorded in Yangulis, who wrote the etymological dictionary of Greek Cypriot. He said that this is a French word and means auxiliary police. So we can see the impact and the impact on the society, how it influences the language. Well, this is the adventure in Cyprus, I would say, the Turcopoles.
So certainly they played their part, and there must have been a large number for their legacy to have lived on all the way up to the British era.
If you think about the whole, the rural Cyprus, and in the past it was a more rural society than an urban one. You need a huge number of people to control this area.
Of course. And this era in which the Turcopoles arrived was the Latin period, and that was the period in which there's a relationship there with the Mamluks, the Mamluk state based in Egypt and Syria, the Levantine coast. So what was the relationship between Cyprus and the Mamluk state?
Of course. If you like, we can first explain who the Mamluks are.
Yes, that would help.
Yes. Mamluk in Arabic means slave.
Mm-hmm.
In Turkish, they are also called the kölemens, again meaning slaves. The Mamluks originally were slave armies serving for the Ayyubids, and later they got to power and established their own state. They were mainly Ctcauk Turks, Turks from the Ctcauk stock, and they called their state Devlet Türkiye, meaning the Turkish state. It is the first state in history carrying the name Türkiye, and the second state after the Gökturks carrying the name Turk. They had a powerful state in the Levant, as you have mentioned, and we know that they carried out at least 14 expeditions to Cyprus. The first campaign was held in 1271, but in 1420, between 1424 and 1426, they launched 3 big campaigns, which ended in the conquest of the island. The earlier ones were penalizing small campaigns, but the last 3 were big campaigns, and the island was captured. The Mamluk army marched on Nicosia and captured the Cypriot king. They carried him away to Egypt, and later then they enthroned him again in Cyprus. Between 1460 and 1464, there are records of a civil war in Cyprus between the children of King John II. And during this civil war, we see that again there's a big Mamluk army lands on the island and solves the problem in Cyprus, and they enthrone King James II, son of King John II, as king of Cyprus, and part of army leaves back to Syria and Egypt, but we know that some Mamluk troops remained in the island under the command of Janibek, Amir Janibek. Amir Janibek has a great importance in Turkish Cypriot history. This Amir Janibek, first of all, he captured Famagusta from the Genoese. Famagusta, during the Lusignan period, for a long time, Famagusta was controlled by the Genoese, because Famagusta was a trade center in the Middle East, and the Genoese, you know, they were trader. Let's say the trader army, because they were empire, but they were like Venetians as well. They were mainly trading. But afterwards, we see that Janibek tries to capture the whole of island, and he was killed in a night raid, and some of his troops were destroyed. However, we know that some of his troops entered Lusignan service. For instance, we got the names like John the Circassian. We got Emir Tagriberdi, and we got Emir Kurkuma, and so on.
These are Turkish names, aren't they?
Yeah, Turkish names. John is John, actually, because this John the Circassian later sat on the Mamluk throne as Jambulat. So this is an interesting guy, I would say. He had lands in Cyprus, in Lusignan service. He had lands in Syria as well, and later he sat on the Mamluk throne as Jambulat. So interesting incident, actually.
There's a number of takeaways there from what you've explained there. First of all, is the Mamluks actually came and took control of Cyprus, and whether we can argue the influence they had as a vassal state or whatever the position was, but certainly we can tell from what you've just explained that they had a say in their internal affairs.
Of course. Well, they settled there as well, because the persons which I have mentioned, like Emir Kurkuma, Emir Tanrıberdi, or John the Circassian, they had fiefs, and we know which villages include these states. I mean, they settled in Cyprus, and we can find the records of their descendants during the Venetian era as well.
Wow!
So they were on Cyprus. They were on the island. So they settled there. They formed a community.
So would you say it's plausible then, for when the Ottomans came, we know that there was a Latin community still present. They continued to remain in Cyprus and are still here today, to this day. So we could therefore say that there is a Turkish element ethnically to this Latin community.
Probably yes, both to the Latin and the Orthodox community, and we know that there were Muslims as well, because during the Venetian period there was a muhtesib in the Carpathian Peninsula. Muhtesib was responsible, is a post which is responsible from the economic affairs of Muslim society. So therefore, during the Venetian period, the Muslims were economically ruled by muhtesib in the Carpathian Peninsula.
So they had a level of autonomy.
Of course, they were on the island. The Turks were on the island as Muslims, as Christians, all sorts.
Another interesting point there that you mentioned is the Mamluks referring to themselves as the Turkish state or Turkey, and this was prior to Anatolia being Turkey. So in a sense, we could say that Cyprus was a part of Turkey before Anatolia had become Turkey.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. He was part of Turkey before the Ottomans.
So considering this the sheer number of Turks and the influence that they played, what was the fate of these pre-Ottoman Turks?
Well, as I have mentioned, we had Christians and we had Muslims. We can only guess what happened. Probably the Christians mixed with the locals, the Christians, and gradually they assimilated to them. And the Muslim joined the newcomers, the Ottomans, the Turks from Anatolia. Therefore, we can say that they had an impact on both the Muslim and the Christian society of the island.
Yes.
Yeah, and we can find the traces of these in the British census, which were held in the island in 1881, 1891, 1901, so on. In the British census, we can see that there was always a small Turkish-speaking Christian community, around 200 persons. These were probably the descendants of the Christian Turks.
Okay. Similar to what you have in Konya with the Qaramanid Turkish Christian community.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. And do you think that the Muslim Turks could have played a part in supporting the Ottoman army in the opening of Cyprus?
Well, we don't have any records about it. But we know that they did during the campaign of 1425 of the Mamluks. Okay. The Limassol and the Skepta castles were surrounded by these Muslim Turks to the Mamluk army.
Wow.
But we don't have any. Well, if we think about the Bayraktar, of course, the Bayraktar, who has a mosque in his name, had a tomb which is in South Cyprus, South Nicosia now. Well, I would suggest he might be a Muslim, because why would they have a mosque and a tomb of a non-Muslim man? You know, he's the man who hung the Turkish flag on the walls of Nicosia, the first man. And the Ottomans later built a mosque and a tomb in his name. I would suggest that he was a Muslim Turk.
Okay, and is there any archaeological findings to do with these pre-Ottoman Turks?
Not much. Or maybe none. The main reason is because we need excavations. I mean, the old, both Muslim and Christian cemeteries in Cyprus are either destroyed or covered with they went underground. I mean, we need to excavate. Probably we will find some findings. For instance, we can mention that there was we know that there are records of a Muslim settlement during the Arabic rule of the island around Lafta. And we don't have the remains of this settlement now. We need excavations there as well. There's a big possibility that because this was a garrison settlement, I would say army city, which is something common in very common in the Far East or Central Asia. It is it's a big possibility that the inhabitants of this city had Turks among them, because we know that there were Turkish slave soldiers among the Islamic armies, Islamic Arabic armies. We need excavations. The only thing we can mention, which is not an archaeological remain or finding, is the bulbal-like tombstones, which is recorded to be found in the Christian cemetery of Poli in the Bafos region. We know that the bulbal is a pure Turkic and Mongolic, meaning Central Asian tradition. And we have the parallels of these tombstones in the Muslim cemeteries, the Turkish cemeteries of Yeşilköy and Balalan villages in the Karpas Peninsula. So we can suggest that these bulbal-like tombstones belong to these Christian Turks.
And these bulbal tombstones, they exclusively are used by Turkish communities then?
Exactly. I mean, since the like the Scythian, Hunnic and Göktürk times.
Okay, so
they were erected for two separate reasons. Some of them resemble the person buried in the tomb, and some of them resemble the powerful enemies killed by the dead person, and they were erected in order to serve him in the other life. So it's a pure Turkic Mongolic tradition,
which has continued on into Cyprus then. Wow,
into Cyprus and into everywhere in the Ottoman lands. I mean, we can find the parallels of these tombstones in Anatolia, everywhere in Anatolia. We have them in Ardahan, we have them in Denizli, I mean, from east to west. And we can see that they're the early stages of the classical Ottoman tombstones, like which has a fess on it. They're the link between the old Balbals and the Ottoman tombstones.
There's a Islamization of the Balbal tombstones.
Exactly. Turks are very good at that. I mean, Islamization of old traditions.
You've mentioned some of your sources now. Could you give us some more detail regarding the primary sources in relation to these Turkish communities?
I mean, as I said before, the Christian sources and Muslim sources. Among the Muslim sources, we can mention Ayni, Zahiri, Makrizi, Ibn Hajar, and Ibn Taghriberdi. Especially Ibn Taghriberdi is a wonderful source. 10 volumes of huge source. 10 volumes. He's a Mamluk historian. So everything he gives is first-hand information, and this one is very valuable. Among the Christian sources, we have Makhairas, which again is a wonderful source. He's a Cypriot historian. He has a chronicle named, which is translated into English as The Sweet Land of Cyprus. Again, first-hand, very detailed information. Amadi, we got Strambaldi, we got Morosini, we got the Chronicle of Prostonios, we got Sanuto, again a wonderful Venetian source, and we got again the Chronicle of Bostron. So both Christian and Muslim. So this is very important, because you get the chance to, I mean, compare them.
Yes. And where there's overlap, then you know for sure that there was
exactly.
Considering the sheer amount of sources, primary sources, then I think both Christians and Muslims need to look at the history of Cyprus in a more nuanced way. Then, I mean, this is part of Cypriot heritage, part of Cypriot history, and in the mainstream historic discourse that we have in the mainstream books that are published, very little is mentioned. I mean, virtually nothing is mentioned about these in contemporary sources.
Unfortunately, I would say this is all to do with politics. I mean, official historiography.
Yes.
For some reason, I don't know why, Turkish historiography prefers to start the Turkish presence on the island with the Ottoman presence, which is not true. However, compared to the Greek official historiography, it's more based on facts, because it's the Turkish official historiography is based on all on records.
Yes,
real records. However, the Greek official historiography is based, I mean, considering Turks on island, is based on the lives of Gerolamo Dandini.
Yes.
Gerolamo Dandini, perhaps we could explain who he is, was a papal envoy for the to Lebanon. On his way to Lebanon, he came to Cyprus as well, I think 10 years after the Ottoman conquest. And in his record, he says that there's 10,000 Christian apostates on the island, which are ready to return to Christianity when the Christian armies arrive to Cyprus. But when we looked at the Ottoman records, at the date he mentions this, 44,000 Turks were settled to the island.
44,000.
44,000. So the numbers doesn't fit. I mean, it's all of lies. So the Greek Cypriot historiography, official historiography, of course, takes this information and builds up a whole lie, saying that the ancestors of the Turkish Cypriots are converted Christians, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and in actuality, we can see that the Turkish history doesn't start in 1571. It doesn't start in 1960 or 1974.
1191.
1191. There you go. So, I mean, Cyprus is a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-religious island, and by us actually highlighting our history, it's not taking away the history or the rights of other communities. That's not our aim here. But it's just we need to focus on our history, and the Turkish Cypriot history begins far beyond.
On the contrary, it displays that people on the island from different cultural and ethnic backgrounds lived on the island for a very, very long time together, without fighting, side by side.
That's amazing. Dr. Gökçe Yükselen, thank you so much for sharing this little known and yet important part of Cypriot history. It's been amazing, and we could go on for much longer, and there's plenty on. If people Google the doctor's name on Google, there's books published by yourself as well. If you want to give perhaps a few examples of the books that you've published or articles for anyone who may be interested to read further.
Of course, first of all, we had a symposium on pre-Ottoman Turkish presence on the island. And we've got 12 different articles in that book. It was published as a book in 2 years ago. A brilliant book, which was edited by Dr. Ctcauk. I have some articles written by me regarding Turkish presence in pre-Ottoman Cyprus, and regarding the Balbals, and in Turkish and English. So anyone who is interested in the matter in detail, they can look up.
Well, thank you so much, and for our viewers, thank you for tuning in to this incredible and interesting episode. And we hope to see you all again on another episode of the CTCA's Voice of the Diaspora. Explore your past. Thank you. See you soon.